I funded my entire extended family for 10 years, everyone's mortgages, medical bills. But after a hurricane destroyed my home, my mother cackled, "This isn't a charity." Dad spat, "We don't take in failures." Sister sneered, "Take your children and get out. We don't want your problems here." That's when reality slapped me. I was their personal bank, not family. So I canceled every payment, froze every account, and blocked every number. By dawn, my phone had 73 missed calls. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here I am, 3 months later, finally ready to share what happened. My name is Olivia, and for 10 years, I was the family ATM. I thought I was being generous, loving, supportive. Turns out, I was just being used. It started innocently enough back in 2015. I just landed my dream job as a senior software engineer at a tech startup that eventually went public. The salary was life-changing, 6 figures that quickly became 7 when my stock options vested. Meanwhile, my family was struggling. Mom had been laid off from her administrative job, Dad's construction business was barely breaking even, and my younger sister Rachel was drowning in student loans while working as a teacher. The first request came from Mom. "Olivia, honey, we might lose the house. The mortgage company is threatening foreclosure." Her voice was shaky, desperate. "We're only 3 months behind, but they won't work with us." I didn't hesitate. I wrote a check for $8,400 to catch up their payments, then set up an automatic transfer to cover their monthly mortgage going forward. "Don't worry about paying me back," I told her. "Family takes care of family." Dad cried when I told him. Actual tears. "You're an angel, Olivia. We raised you right." 6 months later, Rachel called sobbing. Her student loan payments were crippling her, and she couldn't afford both rent and loans on a teacher's salary. Without thinking twice, I took over her $850 monthly payments and started covering her rent too. "I'll pay you back when I get my master's degree and move up the pay scale," she promised. Then came Dad's medical emergency. A heart attack at 58, followed by triple bypass surgery. Even with insurance, the bills were astronomical. I covered the $30,000 deductible and ongoing cardiac rehabilitation costs without blinking. Soon, it became a pattern. Uncle Mike needed help with his mortgage after his divorce. Cousin Jennifer needed money for her kids' private school tuition because the public schools in her area were inadequate. Aunt Linda required financial assistance for her mother's nursing home care. My grandparents needed their medications covered when Medicare gaps left them choosing between pills and groceries. By 2020, I was financially supporting 12 family members in various ways. Monthly, I was paying out roughly $9,200 in mortgages, rent, loans, medical bills, and living expenses. Annually, I was covering around $35,000 in emergencies, vacation funds, because family needs to stay connected, and holiday gifts that I bought for them to give to each other. I didn't mind. Business was booming, my investments were performing well, and seeing my family happy and secure felt worth every penny. When they gathered for holidays at the big house I'd bought Mom and Dad, watching everyone laugh and relax, knowing they could sleep peacefully because of my help, it filled me with purpose. My husband Ethan sometimes raised concerns. "Olivia, you're being too generous. They're becoming dependent on you." "Their family," I'd argue. "When you have the means to help, you help." But none of them ever seemed to try improving their situations. Your dad could expand his business, Rachel could tutor for extra income, but why would they when you're covering everything? I brushed off his concerns. Ethan came from a small family that was financially stable. He didn't understand the dynamics of a large, struggling extended family. Besides, I could afford it, and seeing them thrive made me happy. The warning signs were there, but I ignored them. Family gatherings always centered around what I was doing for everyone else, never around my achievements or interests. Conversations were filled with updates on whose bills I was paying, whose crisis I was solving, whose dreams I was funding. When I mentioned my work or showed excitement about a promotion, the topic quickly shifted back to their needs. They rarely asked about my children, 8-year-old Clara and 10-year-old Lucas. My kids were lucky and privileged because of my success, so their struggles with school, friendships, or activities were dismissed as rich kid problems. When Clara was being bullied and needed therapy, Rachel actually said, "At least she can afford therapy. Some kids just have to deal with bullies." I told myself they were just stressed about money. Once everyone got back on their feet, things would balance out. Then Hurricane Marina hit our coastal town in early March 2022. We'd lived in our beautiful home for 7 years. It was our dream house, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a big backyard where the kids played, and a home office where I worked remotely. We'd weathered smaller storms before, but Marina was a monster. Category 4 winds, 15 inches of rain in 6 hours, and a storm surge that pushed 3 feet of water through our first floor. Ethan and I huddled upstairs with Clara and Lucas, listening to our life being destroyed below. The sound of furniture floating and crashing, electronics sparking and dying, family photos and memories being swept away. When the water finally receded 18 hours later, our home was uninhabitable. Everything on the first floor was ruined. The kitchen, living room, dining room, my office, and the kids' playroom were completely destroyed. Mud, debris, and the stench of stagnant water filled every corner. The electrical system was shot, the hardwood floors were warped beyond repair, and mold was already starting to grow on the drywall. Our insurance adjuster delivered the devastating news: we were underinsured. Despite my financial success, I'd made the classic mistake of not updating our coverage as property values skyrocketed in our coastal area. The payout would cover maybe 60% of the rebuilding costs, leaving us with a $180,000 gap. Our emergency fund would handle temporary housing and immediate needs, but we'd need somewhere to stay for at least 6 months while the house was rebuilt. I called Mom first, my hands still shaking from the trauma of the last 2 days. "Oh honey, that's terrible," she said, but her tone was oddly flat. "Well, you have good insurance, right? You'll be fine." "Actually, we're pretty underinsured. It's going to be expensive to rebuild. But more immediately, we need somewhere to stay while the work is being done. Could we possibly stay in your guest room? Just temporarily, maybe 6 weeks until we find a rental?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Olivia, that really wouldn't work for us." What do you mean it wouldn't work?" "Well, you have 4 people, and our guest room only has 1 bed. Plus, your father's been having back problems, and you know how he gets with his routines disrupted. This isn't a charity, Olivia." The words hit me like a physical blow. This isn't a charity. From the woman whose mortgage I'd been paying for 10 years. Whose medical bills I'd covered. Whose vacation to Hawaii I'd funded just 6 months earlier because she deserved a break. Mom, I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking my family for help during an emergency. You've been what? Throwing money around to make yourself feel important? That's your choice, Olivia, but it doesn't mean we owe you anything." My mouth fell open. Before I could respond, she continued. "Besides, you make all that money. Just get a hotel or something. You can afford it." I hung up, stunned. Ethan found me sitting on our hotel bed, staring at my phone in disbelief. What did she say? I couldn't even repeat it. Instead, I called Dad. "Dad, Mom said you couldn't help us stay there temporarily while our house is being rebuilt. I was hoping maybe we could work something out." His response was even worse than Mom's. "Olivia, I'm going to be straight with you. We didn't work our asses off to provide for failures. You should have been more prepared. Better insurance, better planning. We can't enable this kind of irresponsibility." Failures. Irresponsibility. This from the man whose business I'd kept afloat with $50,000 in loans that were never repaid. Whose heart surgery I'd funded. Whose truck payment I covered when his business was slow. "Dad, a hurricane isn't a failure. It's a natural disaster. Our house was destroyed through no fault of our own. And that's what insurance is for. We raised you to be independent, not to come running to family every time life gets hard." The hypocrisy was staggering, but I was too shocked to argue. I hung up and immediately called Rachel. "Jess, I need help. The hurricane destroyed our house, and Mom and Dad won't let us stay with them temporarily. Do you have any room? Even if the kids sleep on air mattresses, we just need somewhere to land while we figure things out." Rachel's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Olivia, seriously? You can't just dump your problems on everyone else. I have my own life, my own space. Take your children and get out. We don't want your problems here." "Get out? I haven't even come over." "You know what I mean. You're always trying to make everyone else responsible for your choices. You chose to live in a flood zone. You chose to underinsure your house. Now you want to drag your kids around and make it everyone else's problem." The cruelty in her voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from my sister. This was the woman whose student loans I'd paid off completely the year before. Whose rent I'd covered for 5 years. Whose car I bought when hers broke down. "Rachel, I've helped you for years, and I never asked you to. You did that to feel superior, to play the big shot. That doesn't mean I owe you anything." I hung up, my hands shaking. Ethan was watching me with a mixture of concern and something that looked like validation. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. "I'm thinking I've been an idiot." That night, I lay awake in the hotel bed, listening to my children sleep and thinking about the last 10 years. How many times had I celebrated their successes with them? How many times had they called just to see how I was doing, not because they needed something? How many times had they acknowledged what I'd done for them, or shown genuine gratitude rather than expectation? The answer was 0. I thought about every family gathering where I was treated like a walking ATM rather than a daughter, sister, and mother. Every conversation that focused on what I could do for them rather than who I was as a person. Every time my children's needs were dismissed because we were privileged, while their needs were treated as emergencies requiring immediate attention. I thought about Rachel's words, "Take your children and get out, we don't want your problems here." As if my children, her niece and nephew, were burdens to be avoided rather than family members deserving love and support. By morning, I had clarity. I spent the day at a local library with computer access, working on my laptop to access all my financial accounts. 10 years of supporting my family had created a complex web of automatic payments, account access, and financial entanglements. Systematically, I began undoing it all. First, I canceled every automatic payment. Mom and Dad's mortgage, Rachel's car payment, Uncle Mike's rent assistance, Cousin Jennifer's tuition payments, Aunt Linda's mother's nursing home fees, Grandpa's prescription coverage. Every single recurring payment stopped. Next, I revoked access to the credit cards I'd given various family members for emergencies. Over the years, I added Mom, Dad, Rachel, and Uncle Mike as authorized users on my accounts, with instructions to use them only for genuine emergencies. The statements showed charges for restaurants, clothing, entertainment, and luxury items that were hardly emergencies. Then I closed the joint savings account I'd set up as a family emergency fund, transferring the $43,000 balance back to my personal account. This money was supposed to be for true family crises, but I discovered it was being used for vacations and discretionary purchases. I canceled the life insurance policies I'd been paying on for Mom and Dad, worth $200,000 each, where I was the beneficiary but they were the insured. I'd set these up to ensure they had coverage after Dad's heart attack, paying $400 monthly in premiums. The credit line I'd established for Dad's business was closed. The college fund I'd been contributing to for Rachel's future children was emptied and transferred back to my accounts. The investment account I'd set up for my grandparents' long-term care was liquidated. Most importantly, I gathered all the documentation for the loans I'd made over the years. Loans that were never formalized, never acknowledged in writing, and never repaid. According to my records, the family owed me approximately $280,000 in actual loans, not including the ongoing payments I'd been making. With everything documented, I wrote a single message that I sent to the family group chat: effective immediately, all financial support is terminated. Automatic payments have been canceled, credit cards have been revoked, and accounts have been closed. This decision is final and non-negotiable. Given recent events, it's clear that our relationship has been transactional rather than familial. I will no longer subsidize adults who are capable of supporting themselves. The total amount I've provided over the past 7 years is approximately $750,000 in direct payments, loans, and support. Please don't contact me unless it's a genuine emergency involving someone's health or safety. Then I blocked every single one of their phone numbers. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone, Ethan's phone, even the hotel's front desk started receiving calls. I had to change our room because family members were showing up at the hotel demanding to speak with me. By dawn the next morning, I had 73 missed calls from various family members and their friends. The voicemails ranged from tears and apologies to threats and accusations. Mom sobbed that she was sorry, that she'd been stressed and didn't mean what she said. Dad left angry messages about family loyalty and responsibility. Rachel's messages grew increasingly desperate as the reality of her financial situation hit. Uncle Mike showed up at the hotel at 6 a.m., pounding on our door. "Olivia, you can't do this. My house payment is due in 3 days." I spoke through the door without opening it. "Then you should probably figure out how to pay it. This is insane. We're family. Family helps family, Mike. When I needed help, where were you?" The silence was telling. Cousin Jennifer tried a different approach, sending her 8-year-old daughter to knock on our door with a note about how confused and scared she was about potentially changing schools. I felt terrible for the child, but I refused to let emotional manipulation work. Aunt Linda attempted guilt, reminding me that Grandma's nursing home payment was due and that she'd be thrown out on the street without my help. When I checked with the nursing home directly, I learned that Medicaid would cover the costs once they completed the application process and the mandatory waiting period, which could take 3 to 6 months but would eventually provide coverage. The most telling response came from Rachel, who left a voicemail that revealed the true nature of our relationship. "Olivia, you're being completely unreasonable. You can't just cut us off like this. I have obligations, commitments that I made based on your support. You don't get to just change your mind because you're having a bad week. This is going to ruin my credit, my life. You owe us consistency. You owe us consistency. Not gratitude, not acknowledgement of 10 years of generosity, but consistency in my role as their personal bank." What really struck me was how quickly their true colors emerged once the money stopped flowing. Within days, I started hearing stories from mutual friends and neighbors about conversations my family members were having around town. Mom was telling people at the grocery store that I was going through a difficult phase and had temporarily lost perspective due to the trauma of the hurricane. She painted herself as the long-suffering mother dealing with an ungrateful daughter who was punishing the whole family for one little disagreement. Dad was telling his construction buddies that I was being dramatic and vindictive, and that he'd raised me better than this. He claimed that he'd offered to help with the hurricane damage, but I was too proud to accept it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd called me a failure was now claiming he'd offered help that never materialized. But Rachel's approach was the most manipulative. She started a social media campaign that was subtle but effective. Posts about family loyalty during difficult times and quotes about forgiveness being divine flooded her Facebook page. She shared articles about how natural disasters can cause temporary personality changes and how families need to stay strong together during crises. Anyone reading her posts would assume she was the victim of someone else's unreasonable behavior. The most infuriating part was a post she made about children being caught in the middle of adult conflicts, accompanied by a photo of Clara and Lucas from the previous Christmas. The comments section filled with concerned friends asking if the kids were okay, and Rachel's responses were masterfully crafted to imply that I was somehow putting my children at risk with my erratic behavior. When Ethan showed me the post, I nearly lost my composure entirely. She's using our children as emotional leverage on social media. Should we respond? Set the record straight? No. Anyone who knows us well enough to matter already knows the truth. Let her dig her own hole. That decision proved wise when several of Rachel's teacher colleagues started asking pointed questions. One of them, Amanda, had been at school events with Rachel over the years and remembered conversations where Rachel had mentioned that her sister helped with some expenses. When Rachel's lifestyle dramatically changed, suddenly working weekends, driving an older car, moving to a smaller apartment, Amanda connected the dots. Rachel, Amanda said over lunch one day, I'm confused about something. You mentioned before that your sister helped you financially, but now you're posting about family loyalty and forgiveness. Did something happen between you two? Rachel's response, according to Amanda who later called me, was revealing. Olivia thinks that just because she made some loans over the years, she owns us. She's trying to control the whole family financially. Some loans? Rachel, you told me she paid off your student loans completely and covered your rent for years. Well, yes, but I never asked her to do that. She offered. And now you're calling her controlling for stopping? The conversation apparently ended with Rachel becoming defensive and changing the subject, but Amanda wasn't fooled. She reached out to me directly. Olivia, I don't know what happened between you and Rachel, but I wanted you to know that some of us see through her social media campaign. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. These reality checks from outsiders helped me realize that I wasn't going crazy. People who observed our family dynamics from the outside could see what I'd been blind to for years, the one-sided nature of our relationships and the entitlement that had developed over time. The children's perspective became particularly clear during this period. Clara, who was 8 but perceptive beyond her years, made an observation that cut right to the heart of the matter. Mom, why is Aunt Rachel posting pictures of us on Facebook? She never asked if we wanted to be in her posts. What do you mean, honey? She put up that picture of us from Christmas, but she didn't even talk to us much that day. She was mostly on her phone or talking to Grandma about money stuff. Lucas, who was 10 and had always been sensitive to family dynamics, added his own insight. I remember that day. Aunt Rachel was upset because you said you weren't paying for her vacation to Mexico. She said you were being selfish, but then she opened all those presents you bought her. The kids had been absorbing more than I realized. They'd witnessed years of family gatherings where conversations centered around financial requests, where their aunt and grandparents showed more interest in what I could provide than in who they were as people. Are you sad that we don't see them as much? I asked, genuinely concerned about how the family rift was affecting them. Clara shrugged. Not really. They never really asked us about school or our friends anyway. They just talked about grown-up money stuff. Lucas nodded in agreement. And they always said we were lucky because you have a good job, but they never said we were smart or funny or anything about us. Their observations stung because they were accurate. My family had never really engaged with my children as individuals. Clara's artistic talents, Lucas's love of science, their school achievements, their friendships, none of these things had ever been topics of conversation at family gatherings. The kids were acknowledged as lucky because of my financial success, but never celebrated for their own qualities and accomplishments. This realization led me to examine other aspects of how my family had treated not just me, but my entire immediate family unit. Ethan, despite being married to me for 12 years, had always been somewhat of an outsider in family gatherings. His opinions were rarely sought, his career achievements were minimally acknowledged, and his concerns about our family's financial situation had been dismissed as him being controlling or not understanding family dynamics. I started paying attention to how Ethan was treated during the few family interactions that occurred after I cut off financial support. When Dad showed up at our rental house, he barely acknowledged Ethan's presence. When Mom called, she asked to speak to me directly and seemed annoyed when Ethan answered the phone. They'd never seen him as a full member of the family, just as my husband who potentially influenced my financial decisions. The more I reflected on the past decade, the more patterns emerged. Family celebrations had always been funded by me, but planned by others according to their preferences. Christmas gifts were purchased by me, but the credit for generosity went to the person handing them out. Family vacations that I paid for were organized around everyone else's schedules and preferences, with little consideration for what Ethan and I or our children might want to do. Even the timing of financial requests followed patterns designed to maximize my likelihood of saying yes. Requests always came during times when I was emotionally vulnerable or particularly happy. After I received a promotion, someone would need help with a major expense. During holidays when I was feeling generous and family-oriented, someone would have a crisis that required immediate financial intervention. Mom had become particularly skilled at this manipulation. She'd call after she knew I'd had a good day at work, or when she'd seen social media posts about my family doing something fun. The conversation would start with genuine seeming interest in my life, then gradually shift to her latest financial concern. Looking back, I couldn't remember a single conversation with her in the past 5 years that hadn't included some mention of money, bills, or financial stress. The manipulation became even more obvious when I started documenting the timeline of requests versus my family's actual needs. Rachel's emergency requests often coincided with things she wanted rather than actual emergencies. The month she needed help with her car payment because she was unexpectedly short on money, I later learned she'd spent $800 on a weekend trip to a spa with friends. Uncle Mike's mortgage assistance was requested the same week he'd purchased a $3,000 motorcycle for transportation. Even more telling was what happened when I tried to suggest alternatives to financial assistance. When Rachel complained about her student loan payments, I'd offer to help her create a budget or look into income-based repayment options. She dismissed these suggestions as too complicated and insisted that direct payment was the only solution. When Dad's business was struggling, I'd suggested he hire a business consultant or look into small business loans. He'd rejected these ideas as unnecessary when he had a daughter who could just help out temporarily. None of them wanted advice, connections, or assistance in becoming more financially independent. They wanted money, and they wanted it to continue indefinitely without question or condition. The psychological toll of being the family ATM had been enormous, but I hadn't recognized it at the time. I thought the constant stress was just part of being a responsible, caring family member. Now I realized that the anxiety I'd felt before every family gathering, the dread when my phone rang with certain numbers, the sleepless nights when multiple family members had simultaneous crises, none of that was normal or healthy. Ethan had tried to point this out over the years, but I dismissed his concerns as him not understanding the dynamics of a large, close-knit family. Now I could see that what I thought was closeness was actually enmeshment, and what I thought was love was actually exploitation. The financial analysis I'd done when cutting off support revealed numbers that shocked even me. In addition to the $800,000 I'd calculated in direct support, there were indirect costs I hadn't initially considered. The stress of managing everyone's financial crises had affected my work performance at times, potentially costing me raises or promotions. The time I'd spent coordinating payments, researching solutions to their problems, and managing the logistics of supporting 12 adults could have been invested in my own family's goals or my career advancement. There were also opportunity costs. Money that went to my family's current expenses couldn't be invested in my children's college funds or our retirement savings. Vacations we didn't take because someone else needed the money for their crisis. Home improvements we delayed because Dad needed business capital. Claire's piano lessons that we postponed because Rachel needed help with her car repairs. Most significantly, there were the relationship costs. Ethan and I had argued frequently about money, not because we disagreed on our family's spending, but because we disagreed on how much support to provide to my extended family. These arguments had created tension in our marriage and prevented us from being completely united as a couple. The kids had absorbed this tension, and had learned to associate family gatherings with stress and conflict rather than joy and connection. The barrage of contact attempts continued for 2 weeks. When they realized I wasn't responding to calls, texts, voicemails, or personal visits, they escalated to involving other people. Church members, family friends, even former colleagues called to tell me I was being harsh and that family forgives. Mrs. Peterson from Mom's church called the hotel. "Olivia, dear, your mother is just devastated. She didn't mean what she said. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive?" "Mrs. Peterson, did my mother tell you that she's been living in a house I paid for 10 years? Did she mention that when my home was destroyed and my children needed shelter, she told me this wasn't a charity?" The silence was awkward. "Well, no, she didn't mention those details." then perhaps you don't have the full story. These conversations revealed something important. My family had never told anyone else about the extent of my financial support. To the outside world, they appeared to be independent, successful adults. The narrative they'd constructed was that I was some kind of selfish child throwing a tantrum, not a woman who'd been supporting 12 adults financially while being rejected in my time of need. 3 months after I cut off support, Dad showed up at my temporary rental house. We'd finally found a place to stay while our home was rebuilt, and somehow he'd tracked down the address. "Olivia, we need to talk." I spoke to him through the Ring doorbell. "There's nothing to talk about, Dad." "Come on, unlock the door. I'm your father. You're also the man who called me a failure and said you don't take in failures." His shoulders sagged. I was stressed. "Honey, you know I didn't mean that. What I know is that for 7 years, I've supported this family financially. I've paid your mortgage, your medical bills, covered emergencies, funded vacations, and basically subsidized your entire lifestyle. When I had an emergency and needed temporary help, you called me irresponsible and a failure. We can work this out. Come on, just open the door." "Dad, in 7 years of me supporting you, how many times did you check on my well-being? How many times did you ask about my job stress, my kids' needs, or my marriage? How many times did you express genuine gratitude rather than just taking the money and asking for more?" He was quiet for a long moment. We appreciated everything." "Did you? Because your actions when I needed help suggested otherwise." "Olivia, I'm sorry. We all are. But you can't just abandon family." "I didn't abandon family, Dad. Family abandoned me." 2 months later, the consequences were becoming clear. Mom and Dad were selling their house, unable to afford the mortgage payments. They'd moved in with Rachel temporarily, creating tension in her small apartment since she could no longer afford her rent without my help. Uncle Mike had defaulted on his mortgage and was facing foreclosure. Cousin Jennifer's kids were back in public school, and she was furious about the disruption to their education. Aunt Linda's mother had indeed been moved to the Medicaid nursing home, which was actually nicer than the private one I'd been funding. Rachel had taken a second job waitressing on weekends, something she'd always claimed was beneath her when I suggested she supplement her income before. Dad was actively pursuing construction contracts instead of waiting for them to come to him. Mom had gotten a job at a local retail store. In other words, they were all doing what financially responsible adults do when they need money. They were earning it. The most surprising development came from my grandparents. Grandpa called one evening, and his number wasn't blocked because he'd never been demanding or manipulative. "Olivia, honey, I want you to know that Grandma and I never asked you to pay for our medications." "I know, Grandpa. I offered because I wanted to help. And we appreciated it, we truly did. But we managed before, and we're managing now. What your parents and sister did to you was wrong, and we told them so. Thank you for saying that. We also want you to know that we've been talking to Clara and Lucas on video calls. They're good kids, and they miss having Sunday dinners with family. Would it be okay if just Grandma and I took them for ice cream sometime? No other family, no drama, just grandparents and grandkids." It was the first genuine, no-strings-attached contact I'd had from anyone in the family. I think they'd love that. 3 months post-hurricane, our house was finally rebuilt and we were moving back in. The insurance settlement had been supplemented by our emergency fund, and while it was expensive, we were financially stable. More importantly, without the $9,200 monthly drain of supporting my extended family, we were actually saving money for the first time in years. Ethan and I were having dinner on our new deck, watching Clara and Lucas play in the backyard, when he brought up something I'd been thinking about too. "Do you ever regret cutting them off?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that I enabled their dependence for so long. I regret that I confused financial support with love, and I regret that they confused my generosity with obligation. But do you regret the decision itself? No. For the first time in 10 years, I feel like I'm living my own life instead of funding everyone else's. The kids are happier because I'm less stressed. Our marriage is stronger because we're not constantly arguing about money going to my family. And honestly, seeing them actually take responsibility for themselves has been eye-opening. Some of them seem to be doing well with the independence. They are. Rachel is actually proud of her second job now. She posted on social media about working hard for her goals and building character through challenges. Dad's business is thriving because he's actively pursuing work instead of coasting on my safety net. Think any of them have learned anything? Some have. Rachel sent a letter last week. A real, handwritten letter. She apologized for her behavior and acknowledged that she'd become entitled and dependent. She didn't ask for money or help, just said she was sorry and hoped we could rebuild our relationship eventually. That's something. It is. She's also the only one who's acknowledged what I did for her over the years or taken responsibility for her reaction when I needed help. What about your parents? I sighed. Mom calls the kids occasionally, which is nice. But she and Dad are still focused on their own financial stress. The last conversation I had with Mom, she spent 20 minutes complaining about having to work retail, as if it was somehow my fault that she has to support herself at 62. Do you think you'll ever resume a relationship with them? Maybe, someday, if they can learn to see me as a daughter instead of a bank account. But it would have to be a very different relationship than what we had before. That evening, Clara asked me a question that put everything in perspective. Mom, are you sad that we don't see Grandma and Grandpa as much anymore? Sometimes, honey. I miss parts of how things used to be. But you seem happier now. Out of the mouths of babes. I think I am happier. Why do you think that? Before, you were always worried about money and always on the phone with someone who needed help. Now you play games with us and you laugh more. She was right. The constant stress of managing everyone else's financial crises while building my own family's security had been exhausting. The mental load of tracking who needed what, whose payment was due when, and which emergency required immediate attention had consumed enormous mental and emotional energy. Now, our family conversations were about our own goals, dreams, and challenges. We planned vacations based on what we wanted to do, not on who might need financial help while we were gone. We made decisions about our money based on our family's needs and values, not on external obligations to adults who were capable of supporting themselves. 6 months later, I received an unexpected text from Rachel. Olivia, I know I don't deserve a response, but I wanted to update you. I completed my master's degree in educational leadership and got promoted to assistant principal. The pay increase means I can finally afford everything on my own. I also want to thank you. Not just for the years of support, but for cutting me off. I didn't realize how weak and entitled I'd become until I had to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm proud of myself for the first time in years, and I know that wouldn't have happened if you'd kept enabling me. I hope someday we can be sisters again, real sisters who support each other emotionally instead of just financially. I showed the text to Ethan, and we both agreed it was a genuine step forward. A year and a half later, Rachel and I met for coffee. She looked different, more confident, more mature. She talked about her work with pride, shared stories about navigating challenges independently, and asked about my life and my kids with genuine interest. I need to ask you something, she said near the end of our conversation. Okay. How long were you supporting all of us financially? I mean, I knew about my stuff, but I'm starting to realize it was much bigger than that. About 7 years, and it was most of the extended family. How much? I'd actually calculated this recently for my own closure. Including loans that were never repaid, ongoing payments, and emergency funds, approximately $750,000. Her face went white. $750,000? Give or take. Oh my God, Olivia. I had no idea. I mean, I knew you helped me, but I thought everyone was managing their own situations mostly. That was kind of the point. Everyone could maintain their dignity and privacy. But we took advantage of that. We took advantage of you. Her eyes filled with tears. I called you selfish when you were literally supporting my entire lifestyle. I told you to take your kids and get out when you've been paying my rent for 5 years. You were scared and stressed. No, don't make excuses for me. I was entitled and cruel. You lost your home, and instead of offering comfort and support, I was worried about my own convenience. This conversation was the beginning of rebuilding our relationship, but it was fundamentally different from before. Rachel never asked for money or help. Instead, she offered support when I needed it. When Clara broke her arm and I was stressed about juggling work and medical appointments, Rachel took personal days to help with childcare. When I was overwhelmed with a project deadline, she brought dinner over and helped the kids with homework. Mom and Dad took longer to come around. It was nearly 18 months before Dad called with something other than financial complaints or guilt trips. Olivia, I owe you an apology. A real one. Okay. I've been doing some thinking, and some math. I figured out what you were spending on all of us every month, and honey, I'm ashamed of myself. Dad, no, let me finish. You were supporting 12 adults, and we all just took it for granted. We treated you like our personal bank instead of our daughter and sister. And when you needed help, we turned our backs on you. I appreciate you saying that. I also want you to know that your mother and I are doing okay. We downsized to a smaller house that we can actually afford, and we're both working. We're not rich, but we're independent, and that feels good. I'm glad to hear that. We'd like to see the kids sometime, if that's okay with you. Not at our house, we know we need to earn back your trust. Maybe we could meet at the park or something neutral. That meeting went well. Mom and Dad were different grandparents than they'd been before, more present, more focused on the kids rather than on their own financial stress. Clara and Lucas were cautious at first, but they remembered the grandparents who'd played games with them before money became the center of every family interaction. Now, 3 years post-hurricane, I can honestly say that cutting off financial support was the best decision I ever made for my family relationships. The people who truly cared about me as a person found ways to rebuild our relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The people who only valued me for my money. Well, they're still angry, but that tells me everything I need to know about what I meant to them. My marriage is stronger because Ethan and I are finally financial partners working towards shared goals instead of me being pulled in 12 different directions by external obligations. My children have a mother who's present and emotionally available instead of constantly stressed about managing everyone else's crises. Most importantly, I learned the difference between generosity and enabling, between family and users, and between love and financial obligation. Real family doesn't abandon you when you need help, then demand consistency in your role as their personal ATM. The 73 missed calls on that first night were the sound of panic from people who'd confused my generosity with their entitlement. The silence now is the sound of peace from a woman who finally learned that you can't buy genuine love and respect, and you shouldn't have to.